In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to episode 17 of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. Episode 17, Andrew and Jerry take off their masks. I'm Andrew Langer.
I'm Jerry Rogers, I think, anyway.
I know you're definitely Jerry Rogers. And listen, I want to, we got a slightly different show this week. We decided to go, not only are we going maskless, but we are going guestless as well. There's so much going on, and Jerry and I really haven't had a chance just to sit down and talk about everything that's happening in the world, because there is so much going on that we really wanted to just have a conversation between the two of us today. By the way, I'm going to say this, and Jerry, you're going to have to remind me that I need to say this at the end of the show. Thank you all very much for the support, listenership, and viewership, but mostly listenership of Andrew and Jerry Save the World continues to grow. And what I ask is that you make sure you start sharing it when you're listening. If you enjoy it, leave comments, leave reviews, but please share the podcast with folks. For those of you who are tuning in on the iHeart app because of Justice and Drew, a special thanks to you as well. So Jerry, with that in mind, why don't we go right into it? And we're going to just do the two segments today, Ripped from the Headlines and the Bottom Line. So let's go to Ripped from the Headlines.
Ripped from the Headlines.
So, man, oh man, it's been crazy, dude. I mean, where do you want to start? I mean, I think I want to start with the mask mandate issue. Sure. Especially because I'm about to get on a plane, and I got to tell you, I am over the moon about the fact that I'm not going to have to wear a mask in the airport, as well as wear a mask on the plane itself, which we already knew was a dumb thing given how the airlines are running things these days. But this has been it's been a crazy week, both because of the decision that came out. And then the reaction from the faithful left. Where are you on this?
Well, look, it's obvious that the Biden administration decided to appeal the decision only after reviewing social media, Twitter, TikTok, because, and again, I love how you hear people say, oh, this judge is not a scientist or a physician. How can she deal with this?
How dare we have one unelected Trump-appointed judge decide for the whole country? How dare she?
But again, this goes to the intellectual laziness and lack of curiosity from our media. The decision is 60 pages.
Yes.
And guess what I did?
I want to say, Jerry, you thumbed through it. You
I read it. And here's the interesting thing about this, and you'll love it, Andrew. I thought about you, actually. In fact, I printed out part of it, and actually in the margin, if I have it here, I'll show you, Andrew. I wrote in Andrew.
Oh, there you go.
Because, again, a couple of very interesting things. Number one, she doesn't deal with the medicine or the science.
No, of course not.
She deals with the law. And also, she deals with how the CDC misinterprets, misapplies federal law, specifically, and I think the word sanitation is in her decision about 60 times or 70 times, and that's because the CDC misapplies the term according to the title, the section title law that is applicable here. And also, she touches on Chevron.
Yes, of course she does.
Which is very that was my Andrew.
There you go.
But here the bottom line is this, right? She applies the law. It is a 60-page decision that anyone can read. She does put aside the science and the medicine, which you would expect the court to do. And here's my prediction: if they appeal it, it will be embarrassing for the Biden administration.
Which was something that I heard somebody on leftist radio talk about this morning, about how they were so this was a law professor, I think, from the University of Richmond, was surprised at this because of the fact that this is in the 11th Circuit, which is a conservative circuit, and given the makeup of the Supreme Court, and two, by the way, great experts on the concept of deference. I want to talk about two things real quick, Jerry. And I want to, first of all, gin on something you said. I think a good chunk of the reason why the administration reversed itself on this was because of pressure on social media. I think that's absolutely true. We're going to spend some time talking about this. But I also think that there was enormous pressure within Democratic circles for them to appeal this, because the one thing we know, and I'm going to say this, Republicans and Democrats both do this, they like to maintain power. The only president that in my adult life that has ever shrunk the reach of the federal government in a material way was Donald Trump, which, as I've talked about. But the point is that in terms of maintaining the power of the federal government to do these things, that's been a justification from folks in the elitist progressive community. And again, listening to the radio this morning, a commentator said this. The advocates for this, they want to be able to have the ability to do these things in the future. So it's about power. Real quick,
also just as a tag along to what you just said, and you're absolutely right. They want to maintain power, but also, Andrew, it's federal power, right? Because
yes, of course,
because America, right, uniquely American concept of federalism. A lot of the pandemic response has varied from state to state. Yes. And of course, the Democrats, progressives don't like that. But also, don't underestimate this part of it. The left in this country, Democrats in particular, want to blame Republican states, red states, for COVID. This is a theme. And also they are afraid of Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. And so part of appealing this decision is this, and that is, it is a woman, 35 years old, never tried a case, a Trump appointee. Oh, the horror of it. And then it's Florida has these lax rules. Yeah. Florida is recycling COVID throughout the rest of the country. Therefore, because of Ron DeSantis, that Republican rogue governor, because of this rogue judge, we can't allow this to stand. And so they're misreading the room.
Yeah.
They're not looking at the law. And what they're looking at is the politics. And this, I think, has to do with the kind of the bubble of tribalism, right?
Oh, I think that's very true.
They are in their own bubble, and they're listening to their own cocktail circuit and not looking at the law.
And I want to get into this because I want when there are all kinds of crazy reactions. I want to play something. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but a doctor on MSNBC talking about her reaction to this. But but I do want to say this, so that we understand what we're talking about here. The way it works, right? The way, and I literally just wrote 2 essays. They're going to be published, one on Friday, one on Monday, for Constituting America, which is the great constitutional educational foundation run by Janine Turner and Kathy Gillespie. And I was talking about, we won't get into the substance of the essays, but how classical antiquity and the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, how they informed our governance today. The way it works in our society with regards to this is Congress passes a law, and the Congress, the legislature, is supposed to be very specific about the language within that law. But then it is up to the executive branch to interpret and administer that law. And so what happens is that Congress passes laws that deal with what the CDC can do, the Centers for Disease Control can do, and then the CDC turns around and interprets. And there's leeway that's given in this thing called Chevron deference, which comes out of a 1970s Supreme Court case. In how, an agency is generally regarded, their interpretation of what the words mean is supposed to stand. However, there are limitations to this. An agency cannot turn around and say, I'll give you an example. Congress in the Clean Water Act specifically said that the EPA could not regulate farming activity as a violation of the Clean Water Act. However, the EPA could regulate runoff from mountain ranges. So during the Obama administration, and this is no joke, you can go and look it up, the Obama administration attempted to define furrows in a farm field, freshly plowed farm field, as mini mountain ranges, and therefore runoff from the mini mountain ranges would be subjected to the auspices of the Clean Water Act. But you can't do that, and that never actually had to be adjudicated. EPA pulled that back. Jerry's being handed something, and so
I know I want to go through because you just said something that reminded me of what I read.
Okay, there you go.
In this
All right,
decision.
go. I'll keep talking. So the point is, sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
No, so this judge does go through the what's called the Public Health Service Act.
Yes,
and the CDC, apparently there's a title section of the Public Health Service Act the CDC uses to say it has this power, right?
Yeah, justify their power.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, in the mask mandate, in this decision for the mask mandate, the Biden administration only takes one line from the law to justify. So the fact is that their very own ruling, their regulatory ruling allowing for the mask mandate, does not even mention the law, which again tells us that the law is not applicable. So therefore, it's an unconstitutional regulation. However, she does say this, right? Because just like you just said, the Biden administration is doing is saying that the CDC has a kind of sanitation duty here.
Yeah.
And however, it misapplies the term sanitation. And this judge takes that word and again, myriad times in this 60-page decision says that sanitation, you don't sanitize people, you sanitize property. And what the Biden administration is doing here is they are substituting or they are interchanging property and people, which is a misapplication of the law.
It's like this, a crazy case years ago. I got to go back and look it up, but Florida has a rule, like many states do, and I think many localities do, which says that if you are not a police officer, a law enforcement official, or an emergency worker, you cannot have flashing lights on top of your car, right? You can't have what the kinds of I'm thinking about.
Sure. Yeah.
So, in Florida, there is a problem. You've seen this, Jerry. I'm sure you've done this. When you drive past a speed trap, and you know that there's a cop behind you, and you see cars approaching you, do you ever flash your blinkers?
Of course, my headlights,
your high beams.
Yeah.
Warn somebody. Well, the cops I don't remember where it was in Florida, were very angry that folks were warning other folks about oncoming speed traps by flashing their headlights at them. So the cops started pulling people over for doing that, and using this law that says you can't have flashing lights on your car to apply it to what you're doing. And someone finally challenged a ticket under this. And the judge said, wait a minute, the law is very clear. I believe this was the way it was worded. As the statute is written, flashing is an adjective to describe the lights, right? They are lights that flash.
Yes.
It is not meant as a verb to flash somebody.
Correct.
And so your interpretation is inapplicable. I mean, listen, we could go on for hours about how agencies.
I want to throw this at you.
I want to
throw this at you because again, you've talked about Chevron before.
Yeah.
Chevron deference, but my understanding, again, from talking to some legal experts and also some healthcare experts, and that is that this decision really is this judge. This is what has been told to me, that this judge is leading a breadcrumb trail
Sure.
for the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
On the power and the misuse of power by the administrative state. And interestingly, this judge was a clerk for who, do you know?
Clarence Thomas.
For Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in this decision, there are again breadcrumbs. If you're familiar with Justice Thomas and his decisions, his dissents and such things, you can see here that this judge is actually brilliant, and we might be seeing a series of cases We have to roll back much of the administrative state overuse of federal authority given the last couple of years.
And this is a massive issue. And our good friend Wayne Cruz over at CEI spends a great deal of time talking about this. And keep in mind that she's not just leaving breadcrumbs for Justice Thomas, and I don't know about Amy Coney Barrett, but I do know that when it comes to both Justices Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh, I don't know why Justices Gorsuch as though we're plural, but Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, both of them are experts on this issue of deference and have written extensively about this.
The Gorsuches is.
Yes, that's exactly.
You sound like Johnny Depp now.
Thank you. Yes, the Me Poo movement. So that would not surprise me in the slightest that she were doing this. I mean, this is an issue where when you have the problem is very simple and straightforward, especially in the modern era. And this is a conversation I had with a member of Congress probably 15 years ago, who asked me when we talked about regulatory costs, who was to blame? And I think he was expecting me to say the Democrats or liberals or whatever. And I said, well, frankly, Congressman, you and your colleagues are responsible for the growth of the regulatory state. Because when you have a legislative branch that is too cowardly to pass very specific pieces of legislation, and they used vague terminology, it leaves the executive branch with an enormous power to interpret the laws however they want to. Yeah. And this is where you get, and then you have the agencies. You have this issue of Chevron deference, which is the deference that is given to agencies and how they interpret what Congress has to say.
And again, and some of the legal folks I've talked to believe that this is a kind of a first blow that will see eventually court decisions to overturn Chevron.
Without a doubt, and or at least severely limit it. And create the precedent to essentially say explicitly, words have to have meaning, and you can't go beyond them. You can't. A mountain range is a mountain range. Farming activity is farming activity.
Sanitation is sanitation.
Sanitation is sanitation, and so on and so forth. And anyway, we could get into this. I don't want to spend all of our
also. You're right, but on this issue of the science and of the health. Yeah. And this is what bothers me. So we've had 2 years of a mask mandate public transportation, including Uber and Lyft, right? Taking you to the airports. The CDC hasn't done a single study as to whether or not this mandate has been effective in stopping COVID.
One would think.
If 2 years now, in 2 years now, and I want to say this. Part of the reason why I'm sure they've not done a study is because the studies that do exist, and I want to say this very clearly, there is absolutely zero science that cloth masks and surgical masks stop the spread of COVID. There is. So for those who want to say, well, she's a judge, what does she know about the medicine? She doesn't deal with the science of it. But but if she was or were to deal with the science is clear. The cloth mandate, the mask mandate is ineffective.
And you know why she doesn't deal with the science? I mean, it's not just that judges should not be scientists, and they shouldn't have to be scientists. But the reality is, Jerry, right? Of course, science changes over time. What doesn't change is the Constitution,
right?
And the Constitution's division of powers between the various branches of government. So I brought this up for those of you who are listening. I'm sharing a screenshot here. Talk about some of the reactions here that have been over the top. This was one of my favorite ones. This is a Dr. Patel on MSNBC, and I got huge problems with this. Let me pull this back.
I know this sounds
hold on.
If people want,
I get this. So she is on MSNBC. She has been asked about this. Here is what she thinks people ought to do regarding the mask mandate, or regarding masks they want to wear in the future.
If people want to stay safe, the best thing they can do, high quality masks, and that when possible, carry some extra masks. I know this sounds crazy, but if you tell someone next to you on a plane, KN95 and just say, or surgical mask, and just say, I've got an elderly mother at home, I've got a child with cancer at home, will you please do me a favor? Having the people at least closest to you in that row, protecting yourself and them, can be the best safety. So carry some extra masks with you, carry some rapid tests with you if you're traveling.
carry some rapid tests with you. If
But
you're
you know what?
traveling.
Let's be clear about this. She says two things that I'm sure, again, the interviewer doesn't follow up on.
Yeah.
And that is, she said high quality masks, N95 masks.
Yeah.
The mask mandate, every single mask mandate from the local level to counties and cities and states, but also this federal mask mandate doesn't require the N95. And so it does, again, the science, offering your neighbor a cloth mask won't stop the spread of COVID.
I want to play this because, and I'm going to share it with our views on here.
And while you're doing that, let me just remind people too that we had a legal expert or history. Our last show we had on an economist,
EJ Antoni,
and he said something very interesting, and that is, in his research and his conversations, he understands that for someone to catch COVID on an airplane, airplanes happen to be well ventilated, and so therefore you would have to be sitting next to a COVID infected person for 50 hours in order to get COVID on an airplane. And he went on to say that the longest flight in the world is 17 hours.
17
and so
hours,
therefore, again, it's not science to wear the mask on the airplane.
But I want to break this down, Jerry, because there's so much wrong with this clip. I think it's important for us to start with. Let's start with this.
If people want to stay safe, the best thing they can do, high quality masks.
If people want, see, it's funny because when I first heard that, I thought she said if people want to feel safe. So she's lying, and
also she goes on again. Go back. High quality mask, N95 mask.
Oh no, I'm going to play the whole thing.
All right.
If people want to stay safe, the best thing they can do, high quality masks, and that when possible, carry some extra masks. I know this sounds crazy.
Yes. Listen, I want to go there. Absolutely 100%. I want you to sit here, Jerry, and I want you to think about this for a second. You're sitting on an airplane, right? Minding your own business. And a lady comes up, the lady in your row says to you, I want you to hear, I have a mask. We're going to get into what she tells you to lie about in a minute. But I have a mask. That is crazy behavior, isn't it? I mean, I don't think that's normal behavior.
It would not be crazy. Let's start from giving her the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
It would not be crazy if, again, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we didn't have vaccines, we didn't have therapies, and that we had masks that were proven to effectively stop the spread of the disease. None of that currently is true.
Yes, agreed. Let me go on from here.
But if you tell someone next to you on a plane, KN95 and just say, or surgical mask, and just say,
I apologize.
I've got an elderly mother at home. I've got a child with cancer at home. Will you please do me a favor? Having the people at least closest.
So Aaron, I'm going to stop it.
I apologize. She said, I'm 95. I thought that's where she said N95.
Oh, okay.
So she doesn't even, so this is even more dishonest because she says high quality mask, but doesn't define what a high quality mask is.
But also she's telling people to lie, right? I mean, presumably not everybody has an elderly person home. But here's where I start. First of all, if you have someone who is vulnerable at home,
then why are you traveling?
Why are you traveling
or anywhere and then going to visit with them?
I don't understand. I mean, it's like, oh, okay. If I'm in a job where I have to meet with somebody and I have somebody vulnerable at home and I'm afraid of traveling, then you make the accommodations with whoever you're meeting with and you do it via Zoom or what have you. You don't get on the plane or you drive yourself or you do whatever. I mean, once again,
and also
taking the risk to expose yourself.
Right. And Andrew, and you and I are missing the obvious, and that is this idea of zero COVID.
Yes.
This idea of zero risk is impossible. This is the problem, on a lot of issues we've worked on in the past, right? And I remember, when we saw all these smoking laws, anti-smoking laws come into effect. Fred Smith, I almost mention him every show.
Yes, you do. We need to go see him.
He would talk about how if someone wants to take the risk of smoking, isn't that their decision? And also he would say, then why don't we outlaw hand gliding? or other risky activities. And there's, again, the left, for some reason, the progressives, for some reason, believe in this zero risk environment that doesn't exist.
Yes. Yeah. No, 100%.
And what zero COVID gets us, it gets us Shanghai. It gets us where people are literally abandoned and starving and desperate in their apartments. And if they venture outside, they are beaten and they are arrested and they are treated like animals by their own government.
You know, it gets into, right, the discussions that we had about the vulnerabilities of America in the post 9/11 world, right? And how do we make ourselves safe? And a lot of it's about feelings. And you talk about hardening buildings and what you need to do. And I want to say, because 9/11 happened when I was at CEI, you had already gone off to the Manhattan Institute, but there was a lot of discussion about this issue of risk versus risk, and about how, you know, essentially, ultimately, the only way you could fully protect whatever is to put it in essentially a cement, concrete encased bunker. Right. And we can't. That's not how you live our lives. Listen, we all take on these risks. So you know, there's a lot of time going back and forth this week on this issue with the left and the right. You know, the left saying, "Well, there's a really great political cartoon. I wish I'd pulled it up before the show, of some person walking past a guard saying, "I'm gonna." You know, essentially angrily muttering, "I'm going to wear my mask." And then the next panel, the guard saying, "Well, you've always had that option long before COVID."
Well, that's another thing. Like taking away a mandate doesn't mean that you can't do it if you want to. But also, here's the funny thing, because you just said this. You know, this seems to be a left and right issue, but it really isn't. Because
no, I agree with that.
If you think about the left, if you think about Nancy Pelosi going to get her hair done illegally during the pandemic, if you think about Gavin Newsom, governor of California, again, breaking protocols and going and having a dinner at a fancy restaurant, if you think of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez going down to Florida to be maskless and to party, right? The left wants to tell us how to live. Yes. And they don't follow these rules themselves. And that's the issue. This isn't really a left or right, Republican or Democrat. This really is the elite, the laptop class, versus working Americans. Look, working Americans have to engage each other. Think about retail workers. Think about restaurant workers. Think about construction workers. There has to be an interaction. But the elites of this country, right? The Kardashians. Remember, I think one of the Kardashians had her birthday during the peak of the pandemic. And what she did was they rented out a private island.
Yes.
So they went to a private island and had this wonderful celebration. Why? Because she's elite and she's rich.
Yes, absolutely.
The rest of us, by the way, couldn't purchase toilet paper.
Yes.
I mean, so it's just, it really is this elite versus the working class.
Speaking of which, I wanted to pull this up because this came up this morning. Dr. Leanna Wen, right, was a senior public health person, used to be the head of public health for Baltimore. She tweeted out this morning about an article, and it reads, "My at Post Opinions column is about pandemic drinking. More people 16 to 64 years old died from alcohol-related deaths in 2020 than from COVID-19. She goes on from there, and then she says, why and what to do. And I'm sitting here going, you know, and getting on your point, Jerry, about the elites and their attitude. And our good friend Mary Catherine Ham, she tweeted out exactly what I would have said. I would have added, gee, I wonder why. She writes, we took away a bunch of people's support structures and access to healthy coping measures and shamed them if they sought them out, barred them from in-person or any treatment, school, jobs, sports, and gyms. And then she puts up a shrugging emoji.
Yeah, well, she's exactly right. Look,
yes,
it's worse than this. It's not just that more people, young people under the age of I think under the age of 30 died from alcohol. Think about it. More people under the age of 30 died from alcohol-related issues versus COVID in 2020. That by itself is an insane statistic. But more broadly than that, again, when I wear my other hat at Real Clear Health, I have sat down with and I have edited and published pieces from myriad health advocates. There is more deaths as a result of the lockdowns than from the pandemic itself.
It's one of those things that this is something that I learned from a very early age, my teenage years, from my father. So I don't talk about my dad a whole heck of a lot. I talk about it. My dad was a scientist, environmental scientist, background in geology and mineralogy, but made his career working on the impact of inorganic materials on organic tissue, i.e., what happens when mineral fibers get lodged in your body and what happens there. But my dad worked on issues related to the assessment of risk. And when I was a teenager, my dad showed me a table in which it was demonstrated that your risk of death from exposure to asbestos, you were far more likely to die from eating one charbroiled steak a week and the health impacts of those than from an average person's exposure to asbestos. Yet we were creating a national panic over asbestos, and this went on over the years. And it this idea of being able to compare and contrast risk, because we tend to look at things in a very one-dimensional way. One of the examples I like to use, Jerry, is the environmental justice movement, which is even accelerated today as they deal with issues of equity and inclusiveness. But, the idea of looking at, let's say that a chemical manufacturing company wants to site itself a new facility in a poor community. And the environmental justice movement will look at it and say, well, if they manufacture this chemical, they process this chemical here, it's going to raise the cancer risk. And that's one way of looking at it. But what they don't look at is the other side of it, which is, well, if you give people access to jobs and higher paying jobs and access to healthcare and the ability to buy better, less processed foods, their health risks actually go down.
Right.
But we only focus on the one and not the other. And this is the issue. We focus on the impact of COVID and exposure to COVID. Right. And it's different. It's so funny, man, because it's the middle of April, almost the end of April, 2022. And I think back to conversations that you and I had 2 years ago right now, where we were looking at the daily average cases, and we were looking at how all of that was happening. And I was at the time arguing for caution because we just didn't know at the time what we were going to do. Well, here we are 2 years later. We understand the science better.
Now,
sorry, go ahead.
In April of 2020, I was arguing for complete reopening of the economy.
Yes.
And I said at the time that Donald Trump's, the biggest mistake of his presidency, remember, it was around Easter time, 2020, where he said, we're going to have this great resurrection. He was alluding to Easter and the resurrection and the opening. And I thought he was 100% correct. However, the Anthony Fauci's and the Dr. Birx's and others in his administration on his COVID team said, no, we can't do it. Yeah. That was the biggest mistake of his presidency. I was with you in March of 2020.
Absolutely. And I get this.
And I was all in favor of kind of the 2-week shutdown. Although it was unprecedented. We had never done that before. And in fact, I've gone through this on my radio show, and that is what we did, how we responded. The public health community's reaction to COVID is the only time in human history that we use societal lockdowns, that we quarantined the healthy. It had never been done before. Yeah. And here's the irony. It was done because of modeling, because of instead of employing what public health experts, what we've done in the past, we went to this computer modeling system that said if we didn't do X, Y, and Z, shutdowns, etc., we'd see tens of millions of U.S. deaths.
Yeah,
and the modeling was wrong. Again, I said irony is because this is the same thing with climate change.
Yes,
we're using modeling to to direct our public
the
policy.
models are telling us that the temperature is
Right.
going up. Well, wait a minute, but they're not. I get this.
Yeah.
It's funny. I going back when I was lobbying for NFIB years ago. And for those of you who don't know, I was a lobbyist for the National Federation of Independent Business. I was their White House and executive branch lobbyist in the early 2000s. And we had a sit down when we were talking about the bird flu. I've told this on the air. I had a sit down in a meeting with Homeland Security officials talking about, maybe it was also officials from like the CDC and HHS, talking about the response to the bird flu, right? We didn't know what was going on with the bird flu. And they asked me, I said, well, what happens if we force small businesses to shut down for 2 weeks? Sound familiar? And I said, it will be a disaster. And I explained to them then, most small businesses operate on very tiny margins. And if you shut them out of business for 2 weeks, a lot of them will go under. And it's funny because I was thinking about a restaurant that I knew. One of my favorite restaurants in Williamsburg when I was a college student that shut down because they had to close because they were shut down for 4 days during a blizzard, the blizzard of 1996.
Well, Cafe Mozart in Washington, D.C., a landmark, a wonderful restaurant in D.C. I was in there again during the pandemic. I went in with Erica and Claire. I forget why. I think we were up at Catholic University for some accepted student type
the
thing.
Restaurant that you met with somebody from up on Capitol Hill and you had to check behind the curtains to make sure there weren't any listeners.
But anyway, so the owner was there and he said that they were going to close.
Yeah.
And I said, why? He said, because I can't afford it. We were the only people in the restaurant, by the way.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they closed down. And here's the thing. We're still getting reports of COVID relief monies that should have gone to small businesses.
Yes.
For instance, the owner of Cafe Mozart has closed the restaurant.
Yeah.
So that tells me that the government did not provide him with the resources necessary. Right? It's a takings. You forced him to close, and now he's closed down.
Yeah.
So how many small businesses and restaurants and other such entities closed down? And I say this because at the same time, in the city of Baltimore, we have the mayor there directing.
We haven't even talked about this.
Directing $100 million of COVID relief monies to what he calls housing equity. He's taking $75 million and putting it towards dealing with the homeless of COVID relief monies. He has now started Baltimore City has joined this guaranteed income pilot program where he's taken $5 million of COVID relief monies and applied it to giving it to 18 to 24-year-old parents $1,000 a month for the next 2 years. My point is this: we've had hundreds of millions of dollars of COVID relief money not get to the small businesses and families that were economically hurt because of the COVID shutdowns.
No, that's absolutely. It's funny. I was just looking at a list of restaurants that are reopening. We're going to be spending a couple of nights in DC in the fall and thinking about anyway. Someone put out a list, and I hadn't realized, for instance, this is an elitist place, Jerry, but BLT Steak has been closed, and they've actually reopened, which I'm very excited.
Look, a New York landmark, a restaurant that has existed for well over 100+ years. Delmonico Steak in New York has been closed for 2 years, and its ownership is now saying that they're unlikely to reopen. But the point is that we have misapplied the COVID monies. The lockdowns were a mistake. The masking didn't stop the spread. We shut down restaurants, right? Again, because Baltimore's top of mind. The mayor there, Brandon Scott, the first thing he did as mayor when he was elected and inaugurated was shut down outdoor dining in Baltimore. Yes. And I remember I contacted his health officers, his office. No one ever got back to me. And I asked him and I asked them, where's the science? Where's the study or evidence? And it turns out that restaurants, and we shut down restaurants were never, I want to write that word down, never, and circle it and highlight it. Restaurants were never, indoor and outdoor dining were never a vector of the spread. In fact, there was a study that showed that in New York City, that less than 2% of COVID spread could be traced back to restaurants. Sure. Almost everything we did in our COVID response was wrong.
Well, yeah, and we can spend hours sort of revisiting.
Yeah. Let me just say one more thing,
because I want to pivot and talk about student loan forgiveness.
Yeah, of course, and I know time's an issue, but let me just say this in terms of risk, and just kind of put a button in it. Is that the right phrase? So I'm watching the news this morning, which I very seldom do. I don't watch a lot of cable news. I go back and rewatch it later if there's a clip or that sort of thing, or I read about it and then watch it. But there was a report on California and how the Democrats in California, they run the government, have decided to no longer build highways and freeways. Because they're racist.
I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, because highways and freeways are racist. So for equity reasons, we're not going to build them any longer. And of course, because of the environment and climate change. Yeah. But my initial reaction, besides how this is not science, that it has nothing to do with equity, if you mean equity as equality, and I'm thinking about mobility, and I'm thinking about
power.
But I'm thinking about if you're working in the inner city, if you're in LA and you get a job, that job though is 30 miles away. Essentially what the Democrats in California are telling you is, well, too bad. You can't take that job. Oh, you want to take your family to go to wine country and look at the beautiful landscape? No, you can't do that, because and it goes back to this is what our friends on the left don't realize, that what we're doing in the name of equity is actually making it worse for poor people and working people to have the mobility, to have the freedom to build their wealth and to make things better for their families.
One of the points that I used to make, when we get phone calls, and there was one particular lefty listener that I'm thinking about when I was on the air. One of the things that I would talk about, especially to our friends on the left, because the left used to be about empowerment, right? We wanted to empower people to act on their own behalf.
At the very least, giving working class people a fair shot to make it. Look,
the fair deal, the New Deal, the square deal, all about giving people more opportunity to better their own lives and to do for themselves. Go ahead.
No, and a fundamental human right is to be able to put food on the table of your family.
Yes.
And when you take away gas-powered cars and freeways, and you everything has to be public transportation. Recently I got into a Twitter, and I don't do this, you do this more often than I do. But I got into a Twitter discussion with an elected official here in Maryland, and I said, look, I understand that we have to have efficient, clean, safe public transportation, but we can't have public transportation as something that replaces the idea of personal mobility. And I said, talk to any construction worker when they are off their shift, or restaurant worker or retail worker, and they have to get home. They don't want to take 2 buses and stay at dirty, dingy bus stops that are threatening and dangerous. If they had the opportunity to get into their car. And so why don't we make cities, why don't we make communities, jurisdictions more car friendly? Have cars be more affordable. Let's not make it difficult to park. Let's not charge crazy taxes and regulations for parking garages. Why don't we make it easier for poor people to own and operate their own vehicles?
That's exactly it. It's because in the end, it's all about control and power, and that's what I asked our listeners is, when a government solution is being offered, does it give people more empowerment over their own lives to do better for themselves? Can they defend themselves? Can they increase their net worth? Or does it mean that somebody is controlling them? You have to get in transportation that's on our schedule and live in the houses that we want you to live, where
that goes to where we want it to go. Think about public transportation and why there are no subways that go up to Georgetown and Washington, D.C. It's because the rich and the elite there didn't want the working class to come into their neighborhoods.
That's right.
I mean, and again, we should be talking more about how public transportation actually is a hindrance to poor and working people. And again, I'll mention CEI again, because Sam Kasman, who was the general counsel there for years, might still be, I'm not sure, had this wonderful report on how the automobile, without the car, the civil rights movement would have been hindered.
100%.
And,
Oh,
and he,
yeah.
ta-
Yes.
and he talks about the 1964 bus strike, and
Yeah.
without cars, private ownership of cars, the Rosa Parks bus boycott never happens.
Yes, that's exactly it. And then you go on and you talk about the cost of fuel and the ability of people to refuel their cars.
Exactly
Because
right.
keep in mind, right? You had people. It wasn't just that in the Soviet Union, you had a limited number of cars that were available for private ownership, and it wasn't just that you had to show papers and have permission to travel between cities or travel on roads, but also with the fact that there weren't competing businesses building gas stations around the road system in Russia. You didn't have people able to travel and refuel their cars where they wanted to. And so, this is part of the reason why Russia remains a backwater nation.
And again, on this issue, I remember our mentor, Fred Smith telling us that in Soviet Russia, they would show the grapes of wrath as a means of propaganda. Look how poor, right? Look at the poor in America. Look at how devastating the economy is in America. And then the response was the opposite of what the Soviet communists thought, because the response from the people were, wow, even the poor in America own cars.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Or when they would do documentaries about unrest in America and the cost of living in America, and they would show video of American supermarkets, and they're like, "Oh my God, look at these supermarkets stocked with food." That's exactly it. I mean, I want to. And we're talking about this, and we're talking about crazy ways of doing things. You talked about Brandon Scott and the various proposals. We got this news, and this is why I wanted to do the show this way, because you and I have not had a chance to have a wide-ranging conversation here, in a while. And I think we need
the expert advice today comes from Andrew and Jerry.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But the point is, so President Biden, again, coming on the heels of this mask announcement and seeing what's going to happen in November, and getting folks like Elizabeth Warren and AOC and Rashida Tlaib and others, and Ilhan Omar, saying that they're not doing enough for the progressives, and that's why they're going to lose in November. President Biden turned around and announced student loan forgiveness, and one of the things that someone had pointed out to me, and I love this. Well, if we're talking about student loan forgiveness, why aren't we talking about medical debt forgiveness when you have some kind of catastrophic illness? Not that I want to do that, but I mean, if we're going to really talk about this in a serious way.
And you and I talked about this off mic, but we talk about it here, and that is, I mentioned to you, look, I have 2 girls in college,
and this is where I wanted to go.
And we purposefully, my wife and I,
same here,
invest our money in our kids. We don't have fancy cars. We don't have extra cars. We don't have a shore house. I haven't purchased clothes. I mean, in 2 or 3 years. My point is that we are on a stripped down budget. Why? Because I don't want Bridget and Claire, my 2 oldest, but also when Maddie and Grace and Liam go to school, I don't want them to be saddled with student loan debt.
Of course.
So now what I could have done is I could have bought a new car. I could have gone on that vacation. I could have bought a new suit or whatever, taken my wife on a 25th wedding anniversary cruise. I could have done all those things and take out 80 grand for my girls to go to school, but we decided not to. But again, in this conversation, what about reparations then for those of us who made fiscally conservative decisions so we would save our kids?
Well, it's one of those things, right? Because it gets into all the things that we've been talking about today, which are the unintended consequences of doing things. You have policy and politics that drive things, and nobody thinks about, the in this case, it's unintended economic consequences, right? The idea of, when we had the federal government essentially take over the student loan program, and it became,
and by the way, for our listeners, you can trace the acceleration of tuition with that decision to have the federal government take over the loan programs. The fact of the matter is that if you're going to have loan forgiveness, then all these colleges that went from, like, Fordham University went literally from $16,000 a year tuition, room and board to over $75,000 a year today. But they have a multi-billion dollar endowment. So does Georgetown. So all these schools, they were able to pull in profits and build new facilities and pay higher salaries and have these endowments. If we're going to have this reparations, this payback of student loans, why not force the colleges to do it? Why do taxpayers have to do it?
Well, and it's one of those things where, and I'm sure that the higher education lobby, as powerful as it is, would have something to say about this. But you hit the nail on the head, right? When you have colleges that are out there and they're, Jerry, no joke, literally building water parks on campuses.
Yeah.
As a way of attracting students. There's something, and they can do this, right? And so you all understand the economic mechanisms that are at work. If anybody can go out and get a student loan because the student loans are federally guaranteed, then the colleges themselves can charge whatever tuition they want, which means they can spend whatever they want. That's why there is this direct relationship between,
which is why, though, also for those of us who are avoiding student loans, why the cost of tuition is skyrocketing at a rate that doesn't match, notwithstanding the inflation of today, but historically over the last 20 years, has been out of sync with the rest of the economy.
Yeah, I'm sort of sitting here and thinking about this and understanding where where college tuitions were when you and I were in school.
My first year at Fordham, which again, I went to Fordham from 87 through 91. When I graduated Fordham was $16,000 a year tuition, room, board.
Yeah,
and I mean
do you know what Fordham's tuition is today?
It's $75,000.
Jesus. I mean, and think about that. That's per year. So if you are a student, if you were there for 4 years, that is $300,000 that you're spending on this. And
for a BA, which by the way, now that I'm in a position where I am asking, publishing, and I'm dealing with writers and public relations firms, the more people I talk to in the area of public relations and this kind of like public affairs work experience is more important than college experience.
And thankfully, we're seeing certain schools that are placing a greater emphasis on getting students that practical experience that they're going to need in order to get out there. It's one of
Andrew, on this point, if I were to hire an editor, and because of COVID, so I have two choices. I have a young lady who graduated from Fordham with an English degree, a BA, but very little work experience. So during the summer she worked, and maybe she did a couple of pieces for the local Fordham paper, but again, a solid student, good GPA, or someone because of COVID decided to take the 2 years off and work for the White House Writers Group, or work for the DCI group or some other big firm. I'd be like, you know what? I'm taking the one who's short, doesn't have her BA yet, but has 2 years work experience versus the one who has her BA.
And I'm glad you framed it that way, because you and I are thinking about the exact same person. I was trying to figure out a way of explaining that situation without divulging that person's identity. So thank you very much. But that's the point here. Is that, and you and I both know this, that employers are looking for, it's not just that they're looking for ways that various applicants stand out, but one of the things that I've talked about with students that I've mentored and other folks that I've talked to about this, people who are just starting out in DC, ultimately an employer is going to be looking for how you bring greater value to their enterprise. How do you make their bottom line better? I mean, even if they're a nonprofit organization. And one of the ways to do that is to have that practical experience moving forward.
I mean, you look, I'm not saying don't get your BA, but I am saying that work experience matters. Hey, by the way, Georgetowns Endowment is $2.6 billion.
And that's just it. It is, they are hitting up folks to get this kind of money. Listen, I want to shift gears, because we've been going for an hour. We still haven't touched on one of the other big stories this week, which is this crazy story about the libs of TikTok.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yes. This columnist for the Washington Post, Taylor Lorenz. I mean, this is one of those stories, and I want to revisit something real quick, Jerry, because this week has underscored this for me. You and I had a conversation last week about Twitter, and I don't know if you've had any further thoughts about this, about whether or not Twitter, the leadership at Twitter will have any impact changes. But once again, with these stories, and I tweet about big stories all the time, but my tweets are being seen by more people now. I know that I'm getting much greater response to things. I still don't understand how what distinguishes one tweet from another in terms of the algorithm, but I do know that my tweets are being seen by more people. This story, for the uninitiated, there is a Twitter account called Libs of Tik Tok. It is, I have a TikTok account. Jerry does not.
I do not.
I was told by somebody who's in social media marketing that I should probably get a TikTok account. And so
what do you do on TikTok? You put videos?
They're short videos. So when I visited this really great barbecue place down in South Carolina, I put up a short video of that.
Okay.
We had a snowstorm. I recited Robert Frost, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy
That
Evening.
is a Langer thing to do.
100% it is. And I got a big response from it.
Right.
But the point is that Libs of TikTok takes videos that are posted in this very public forum called TikTok, which is all about short videos, and puts them up there as a way of skewering, as a way of poking fun and underscoring how crazy the left can be.
Well, it Libs of TikTok takes a video put up by some other entity. And just posts it.
Yes. In fact, let me pull up a sample.
But this Washington Post journalist, behaves exactly the opposite in terms of how a reporter or journalist should act, in terms of propagandizing, in terms of editorializing, in terms of wanting to do damage. In fact, she actually says, right, that what's her name again?
Her name was Taylor Lorenz.
Taylor Lorenz. She says that she's looking to hurt, right?
Yes. No, she didn't say she was looking to hurt. She said she was looking to expose. She wanted to. She was literally writing an expose, not on the Libs of TikTok account, but on the woman who was behind it. Okay. That's the issue here. Is literally her goal was to expose this person. And the irony is, and let me pull this up. The irony is, here is Taylor Lorenz. Let me pull this up. Here is Taylor Lorenz herself on TikTok, talking about the problem of doxing. Let me, as I do this here. Sorry, Jerry.
So the doxer is upset about doxing.
Yeah. So here is what she had to say.
Please. A bunch of people are asking if I'm going to write about the West Elm Caleb story. No, I'm on book leave. I can't keep writing pieces for the New York Times. I literally do have a lot of deadlines.
All right, but time out for a second. I want to say, and I said this to Jerry off mic, and I am going to mansplain is not the right word. I have a real problem with someone who is a high-level journalist, as this person is supposed to be, doing a video where she's essentially laying in bed, which it's just this bothers me on a host of levels. But here she goes. Let's keep going.
But journalists who are writing about it, please speak to people with experience in online harassment. I'm not gonna lie, I've been pretty horrified by a lot of the media coverage of this. A lot of people are just aggregating some of the cruelest commentary online and whipping it all up into a news story with absolutely no comment from Caleb or nuance about the situation. The top story on Google yesterday was literally this House Beautiful story that doxes Caleb, puts his full name in the story, zero comment from this man. After this whole article gleefully encourages this online harassment and doxing campaign, they literally use him to sell West Elm furniture through affiliate links. Once again, commercializing a harassment and doxing campaign. I think the media needs a total wake-up call in the way that they cover online harassment, and this is just the latest example of it.
The media needs a wake-up call because of in terms of this kind of online harassment. And let's talk about this, which is that this person, this journalist, Jerry and I have talked about this. She is technically a columnist. She's not a reporter.
Okay. That makes a difference.
Well, yes. I mean, I at least I think that's the way it is. But the point is, she reached out to this person and then reached out to this person's family members and other folks. She reached out to, I think, the press secretary,
yes,
Ron DeSantis. And this is where we learned that she was doing this writing to expose or do an expose on this person. And then she posts this person's name behind Libs of Tik Tok, and the story initially linked to her professional credentials. Now, the only reason why you do that is because you want to exert pressure on this person. Sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
This is doxing.
This is doxing.
Yeah,
and the whole idea,
the very thing she's complaining about, she actually engages in. And what's worse is her actual story in the Washington Post was dishonest, because
yes,
it makes it seem like the Libs of Tik Tok edit or they cherry pick. They don't. They just take videos,
yes,
of what liberals are saying on TikTok and reposting it.
And there is nothing to stop somebody on the left from doing a similar conservatives of TikTok
Right.
account.
It's funny. Matt Walsh, who's a podcaster. We've had him on our podcast in the past. I think he's at the Daily Wire. Anyway, long story short, he said that he was on with Tucker Carlson, and he told Tucker, he goes, look, I would love for someone. In fact, when Media Matters or other left center places repost my stuff, I love it because I stand by what I say. See, the problem here is that Libs of TikTok, they post what progressives don't want leaking out in a way that they can't control. That's the problem.
Yes. And as of late, they've focused on this issue of the dialogue over what's been happening in Florida, this law, and the rightly concern that some parents have over how gender and sexuality is being discussed and at what age with kids.
It's very interesting you bring this up, because both the New York Times and Washington Post, again, two left of center news outlets, have both recently published pieces on this issue of sexual identity, and throwing up some caution that they had in the Washington Post had a trans person write an article saying that they are concerned about the contagion of trans, non-binary, queer, that 20% of Gen Z, is that right? What's Gen Z?
Gen Z is what comes after Gen X. That's I think anybody born after 1985, maybe.
All right. So apparently the idea of identifying as LGBTQA plus, identifying as queer, has gone from the baby boomers or the World War II generation as less than 1%, as the most current generation, it's over 20%. And this trans person, who's also a psychologist, by the way, says that there's something wrong here, that we're not just making it safe for young people in particular to come out as queer, but rather we are promoting it, and again, to use some what some think are ugly terms, but we are in a sense recruiting and grooming.
And
And
I'm sorry,
and
Jerry.
this should be a concern.
Let me be really clear. So you and I are Gen X.
Okay.
One of my brothers is a millennial. So millennials were born between 81 and 96.
Okay.
Our kids are considered Gen Z. So anyone born between 1997 and 2012 is Gen Z.
Yeah. So Gen Z.
Yeah.
So a
That
lot of
makes sense.
a lot of Gen Zs are 16, 17, 18, 19, 20,
Yep.
21, 22. Over 20% identify as queer.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is not, again, this is not science, this is not nature. This is it's cool to do it. Look, Andrew,
Yeah.
I'll bring our audience back. Do you remember in the 90s, Vanity Fair, all the kind of fashion and culture publications? There was a time, and they called it lesbian chic. Remember this?
Yes. Yes, I do.
That it was cool to be lesbian.
Yes.
And so therefore, a lot of women who weren't or didn't identify as lesbian identified as lesbian because it was the cool thing to do. We're in a situation now where it's the cool thing to be non-binary.
I want to be really clear about something. If one of my kids were to come out to me, I would love them. I would be happy, for them. I would support them in what they do. I want to be really, really clear about that.
Now, wait, I'm going to contrast that. I would not be happy for them.
I understand.
I would not support that choice because I believe it's a choice. I believe that being non-binary, being trans is not what is not God's best for you. And also, again, at some point, Christian people have to reconcile. The scriptures are clear that God created them male and female. He didn't create them male, female, and something else. And again, I'll say this too, and I know it's controversial. And I have family members who are gay. Being homosexual, living the homosexual lifestyle is not God's best for us.
I was going to point out that we're all sinners, but set that.
Yes, well, of course. Again, and I look, don't get me wrong. I would be accepting in a sense that I would love my family member. They would live in my house. I mean, nothing would change in terms of my love. But I wouldn't be popping champagne and having a disco night.
I was going to tell this story. So I went to college with I'm not going to use names, but Greek sisters, one of whom became a radical lesbian feminist, actually wound up working with a woman I went to high school with as one of the editors of Bitch magazine, which is again a magazine of radical feminism. But she wound up becoming the lesbian sex columnist for FHM magazine. You remember FHM magazine was one of the
Yes.
space. So she was the lesbian sex columnist for FHM. And then while researching a book, wound up meeting a man in the course of researching her book, and she fell in love and married him and became what was termed in that community as a has-been. And I know this sounds really like the plot of Chasing Amy, the Kevin Smith movie, but no, this really happened. She is now living her life. I don't know if she's living as a bisexual woman or what have you. But the point is, I've seen this happen.
Here's the thing too, and why sexuality is complicated.
In fact, Jerry, tell you what, hold that thought for a second, because I think that's a good indication. It's a good way of us to segue into the bottom line.
The bottom line.
The bottom line.
All right, you were saying, Jerry.
Look, the issue of sexuality is complicated.
Yes.
And I'm going to speak from a kind of a biblical worldview. God did create us male and female. However, he also created us to be adaptable and to have free will. The sexuality is something that it really does exist on a scale. It makes perfect sense to me, that if someone has been part of a non-traditional family with non-traditional, non-Orthodox friends, that they would have certain non-traditional, unorthodox beliefs and even make certain lifestyle choices. Look, there's science where a heterosexual male goes into prison for a long period of time, and because of the human need for intimacy, not just sexual intimacy, but intimacy, they end up falling in love or having relationships, same-sex relationships in prison. Again, because it's human nature to want to touch, to be touched, to have intimacy, to be loved, right?
Yes.
But then they exit prison life and go back to a heterosexual a lifestyle again. So this idea that we could just decide gay, trans, straight is so overly simplistic, and it's not even science. It's not even understanding our history. If you think about this, and I'll say my last word on this. People say that the Bible is anti-gay, and that's only because in that time gays were discriminated against. Same sex. The word homosexual doesn't come into the English vocabulary until the 1860s, by the way. Before the 1860s, we didn't have a word for same-sex attraction. We just called it same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
But certainly homosexual.
And we referred to the activity, whether or not it was sodomy or buggery or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, but in the time of Christ, in the time of the Jews of the Old Testament and Christ of the New Testament, homosexuality, again, same-sex attraction, was highly acceptable in Roman culture. You'd go to Andrew Langer would come to the plaza, the home of Jerry Rogers, and the first thing I would do was offer him wine and then ask him, do you prefer a woman, a man, a boy, or a girl? I mean, this was, again, this idea of sexual fluidity was common.
Folks, this is not where I thought this show was going to go.
But however, Judaism and later Christianity disrupted what was socially acceptable. And what we learned through the Old Testament, through the Ten Commandments, what we learned through Jesus and his teaching is that God has more for us than just our base desires.
Yes.
And therefore, we can choose to live a life that is chaste. And by the way, chaste doesn't mean that you remain a virgin or you don't engage in sexual activity. A married man is chaste as long as he stays, again, doesn't commit adultery and doesn't commit, acts of sex outside his marriage. What God calls us to is this more perfect union, and in God's plan, it's husband, wife, family.
Yep. It is. Someone explained to me. Actually, it may have even been a New York Times article years ago, talking about laws of kosher, of kashrut, kosher eating, kosher kitchens, etc. It's not that, God does not want Jews to not like bacon. God wants Jews to want bacon. They to like bacon,
and then
bacon,
choose not to eat it.
Choose not to eat it.
Exactly. Ding, ding, ding. So this idea, again, that I accept,
and nevertheless, that's why I when I see the bacon cheeseburger in front of me,
but this is also
to resist that temptation.
But that's actually a very good way of putting this. The fact of the matter is that if you have a relationship with God, what he requires is your surrender and your obedience. What did Jesus say at the end of the Gospels? He said, if you love me, you will follow my commandments. And the commandments are very clear in terms of sexual ethics. And again, I'm not judging the gay person, the trans person, the queer person, the non-binary person. There's no judgment from me. And I think in a free culture, a free society, these people who have live this way and express themselves this way, a combination of nature and nurture, I think they should be able to live free, live in dignity, live without discrimination. And I would fight for that. And I have fought for that. But if you're talking about the spiritual realm, if you're talking about what God has for us, God wants more for us than just the physical pleasures and physical limitations of these lives. Make sense?
Yeah, no, listen, God wants us to focus on the hereafter, not the temporal world.
Right.
Yeah. I want to shift gears real quick, Jerry, because there is something that is having nothing to do with any of this that has been sitting in my mind. And I mentioned this to you yesterday. As things get ramped up, or not ramped up, as the situation in Ukraine continues to pivot. I want to say something, sorry, as I'm trying to formulate my thoughts here.
I threw you off there with all the non-binary stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yes. No, it's fine. My point is this, as the United States is pledging more military support for the Ukrainian resistance, there's been pushback from a variety of camps, whether or not it is the far left, the Noam Chomskys of the world, to folks on the right.
Is Chomsky still alive?
Yeah, Chomsky's still alive.
How old is he?
That's a good question.
Man, he was someone that when I was in school, he was all over my my textbooks.
Noam Chomsky is 93 years old.
Wow, good for him.
So, and still, 100% wrong about the
yes.
And so,
yes.
Noam Chomsky, who just wrote that he wants the Ukrainians to lay down their arms and essentially come to the negotiating table, and they have to deal with this with a realistic worldview. At the same time, writers on the right, and I'm going to say this, I was very angered by a colleague of mine who wrote that referred to this conflict as a border skirmish. And I just would implore my friends on the right who are offering up, it's okay to be skeptical. You have to be skeptical. But let's remember
and we're not supporting constant war if we recognize that the Russians are the aggressors, that the Ukraine people have a right to self-defense and to push back.
This is not a border skirmish.
No, of course not.
This was an invasion.
Unless Kyiv is on the border.
Is on the border.
Right.
Yes. It is. This was an attempt at regime change.
Yes.
Now, again, sort of couching it in the rhetoric of denazification or pushback against NATO, whatever. The point is, Russia attacked on 3 different fronts, and they tried to capture the capital of a nation. That's not a border skirmish. That is trying to initiate regime change.
This is warfare. This is a war.
And let's remember again, as you sort of peel these things back, that it's not only that Russia is the one who invaded, but Russia's pretexts ring hollow. That if Russia was concerned about NATO expansion, there are plenty of venues internationally for them to deal with this, to be concerned about it. If they're concerned about the Donbass republics and their ability to be independent, then they should have gotten the international community on their side to support this. And there are plenty of folks around the world that would have supported this in the UN. And if it was about denazification of Ukraine, then you can't go about using anti-Jewish mercenaries from Libya and Syria, right? Who have been hired by a company whose name comes from a much revered figure in Aryan lore, the Wagner Group. So, we have to be really clear. And I know this has been something that I've been talking about for more than 2 months now. But we have to be clear about what the facts are in this situation. So I just wanted to say that. Jerry, you are on Sunday. Are you on elsewhere this weekend?
No, I'm on the Jerry Rogers Show Sunday, WBAL, 7 to 10. If it's Sunday at WBAL, it's Jerry.
Yes. So I'm reminding you all, as I said that I was going to say at the beginning of the show, please tell your friends about the show. Our numbers are going up, which is what we want. We're having listener growth. We're having viewer growth. That's as it should be. Please tweet out or share on social media that you're listening to the show and where you're listening to the show. Leave us reviews so that we get greater notice elsewhere. All of these things are helpful for the propagation of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. Jerry, I know you want people to find the truth, don't you?
Well, before we do that, is today a special day?
Oh, yeah. I'm sort of loath to talk about these things, but yeah, happiest of birthdays to my older daughter.
You're loath to talk about it?
I don't like that. Listen, I don't like talking about my kids all that much on the air.
All right.
But
I do. I talk about my kids all the time. Hey, happy birthday. Also, it's my sister Colleen's birthday today.
Happy birthday, Colleen. Yeah. But yeah, it's Maddie's birthday today. She turns 20. Quite exciting. In fact, so we're excited. We're heading down a quick trip to Charleston because she's giving a presentation on a symposium on seafloor mapping. So we're going to head down and see that. But Jerry, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Find the truth, plant your feet, and stand firm. God bless you.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun and stay safe.